Good afternoon, folks, and welcome. This is our second Neapolitan session of the day in ballroom number 2. So if that's not what you're looking for, now is your time to make your escape. We thank the audience for your stamina at the end of a very long day, but we're glad you're here for what promises to be a very interesting session. So I'm going to turn this over to Nancy and her panel for text and data mining licensing issues. Thank you.
And thank you, Meg. And welcome to all of you here today. I'm glad you've been able to find us, and I certainly, again, agree. It's kind of been a long day. It's a great conference. I'm sure you agree as well, but wow, it's like we're getting so much information. We're hoping that we can organize this session a little bit differently. We're going to be having some short presentations, and then really we're going to turn it over to you. I had a chance to work on a couple of articles for Katina for the website on text and data mining. And one of the things that I found out in doing that was that, at least here in the United States and Canada, North America, it's still so fresh, it's still so new, there are so many questions, and a lot of the answers that one organization has doesn't necessarily work at all for another. So it was very interesting and quite an education for me, but because of that, the lesson I took from that was that we really need to start talking a lot more about text and data mining, what's happening around us, and maybe if you don't have a lot going on, then understand and listen and share with the people around you who maybe have a little bit more experience. There is no one formula. We don't have any one way of doing it. Someday we might, but we don't today. I want to introduce our 3 speakers who are going to speak for 5, 7, 10 minutes on their experience with text and data mining. We have 3 wonderful perspectives here that we're going to present to you. Certainly not the only perspectives that we might have, but I think all of these are valuable. They've all agreed they'd be happy to take your questions and answer whatever questions you might have and give you whatever sort of information and insight that they have to give you. So I'm going to go ahead now and introduce our speakers. Excuse me for the paper here. Our first speaker is Daniel Dollar. He's the Director of Collection Development at Yale University Libraries. And he's been involved, he's currently involved with their budget management, an important aspect when it comes to collections, the Collection Steering Committee, and also the Executive Committee for the library as a whole. He's written on a variety of different issues, certainly e-books and a lot of transformations that we've seen here. And he's going to give us a perspective as being a large, very multidisciplinary institution and the issues that he sees that are important and how it impacts his practice as well as the current structures that exist at Yale. Our next speaker is someone who has been an academic, understands academic research. She has a PhD in anthropology and has done anthropological research, and that is Alicia Wise. She has been at Elsevier since June of 1910. She is leading the Universal Access team. In this role, she's responsible for access and related policies, building relationships with other stakeholders in scholarly communication, and she has also worked for the UK Joint Information Systems Committee, first to manage national negotiations for access to a broad range of intellectual property issues. So she has experience on different aspects of these sorts of issues that we're looking at today. In Great Britain, text and data mining is developing very differently than it is here in North America. And so I really appreciate her perspective on this as well. Our last speaker here, our last specialist, is Darby Orcutt. He's the Assistant Head of Collection Management and Chair of Humanities and Social Sciences Subject Team at the North Carolina State University Libraries. He has negotiated content mining access with numerous vendors, including the first ever blanket mining agreement between an institution and a major commercial vendor of historical abstracts, and that was from Yale. And similar first institutional agreements with Accessible Archives, United Priorities, Adam, Matthew, and others that are going to be announced in the near future. So I want to turn this over to Daniel Dollar now, our first speaker. And again, we will have lots of time for questions, insights, concerns, whatever from you as we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. All right. So I'm starting my timer here. Okay, text and data mining, licensing issues. Some of you may have seen the video that Elsevier created on text and data mining. It's a nice overview. I'm taking this from LIBR, the Association of European Research Libraries text and mining website, where it talks about text and data mining is basically it's machine-read material. We're doing is copying of large quantities of material, which can sort of concern people when you talk about copying. But it's in order to extract data and then recombine it to find patterns. This is really, I thought it was very interesting that this morning we had Jim O'Neill talking and saying, how many of you have done text and data mining? And it's like, okay, every time you do a Google search. So we're all text and data miners, whether we knew it or not. But it is certainly something that is critical if we're going to try to understand a large corpus of material. We're moving beyond, I think, like the horse and buggy era where we call things e-journals and e-books. It's the content has moved into a digital age, and we have to think in new ways in order to make sense of this huge corpus of material. And text and data mining is a tool to do that. And really see this as becoming an everyday tool. Or part of a toolkit for the discovery of new knowledge. And even in the humanities, it's going to become a mainstream part of scholarly inquiry. That's what we see coming, or envision. What are the challenges? I see 4 major challenges: legal, pricing, access, and library support. On the legal licensing side, our position is, wait for it, we really don't see a reason to have separate TDM licenses. The output is subject to the same terms and conditions undertaken with any research using licensed resources, and making lawful use of the content when employing TDM is still governed and subject to the license agreements that we've signed. We can't do text and data mining and just throw the stuff on, just throw content out on the web or recreate the products that we've licensed for the whole world. But we can make research use of that content, again, within the context of our licenses. We do accept the premise that the right to read is the right to mine, whether it's close human reading or distant machine reading of the material. And if it was Susan, I think, Susan Riley from LIBR, who was supposed to be here on this panel. You got me instead. Yay. But if she was here from LIBR, I think she would talk a little bit about how in Europe they feel that they're behind, the researchers there are behind us in terms of our ability to make use of text and data mining because of fair use and the way it's interpreted in the United States. And I would direct you to the LIBR website for more information about their rationale for that. Dropping into pricing, as research libraries, we are paying a premium for content. And so if we're paying a premium for content, for digitized content, then it should come with text and data mining as a matter of course. I sort of think of the analogy of when back in the 90s we started getting content on disks, but you couldn't print or you couldn't save it because we were worried about what's going to happen to the content. We sort of got past that. We got past the early days of e-journals when we were worried about electronic ILL. I sort of feel we're in the same kind of early stages with text and data mining. There's a lot of concern. What's going to happen? The content's going to get out on the web, and bad things are going to happen. But from the library standpoint, and we're paying this premium for content, if you're going to have these kind of restrictions, then in a few years I'm going to have to go back and buy text and data mining rights. Then didn't I pay full royalties the first time around? Actually, I already paid it more than once because I bought it on microfilm. But let's, oh well. We'll get it right one day. But I'm quite concerned as a Chief Collection Development Officer of my institution going in and making six-figure purchases or high five-figure purchases, and I'm going to have my colleagues or the person who comes after me saying, what in the heck was he doing by not including this and not making sure this was clearly understood when we made this acquisition. Access. That's good. So in terms of access, getting the raw data either on a drive or putting it in a secure location in the cloud where we can actually do text and data mining. We've had some success with vendors where we've been able to do that. We're able to get research output from that text and data mining and then point back to the publisher's website for the human readable content. And that's a real win because we're making new discoveries, or researchers can make new discoveries. It points back to the platform where we have the human readable licensed content, and what do you know, it drives up usage. So it's a good thing. APIs come out, are a major issue when we're talking about text and data mining, and there's good and bad. We look at what JSTOR is doing with the Data for Research program as good. It's not mediated. We're also optimistic about what the HathiTrust Research Center is working on. They're trying to work on an API to mine all of the content within HathiTrust, and that includes the post-1923 content, which is quite problematic. So we see those as advantages. We take a dim view with API where it's going to be mediated or potentially mediated by others, sort of looking over the shoulder of the researcher, potentially. And then accessibility. This is something that I can only touch on briefly. I understand that UC Berkeley is making some use of text and data mining for accessibility issues. And so, I don't know all the mechanics of how they're doing that, but it's an interesting idea that maybe they can take that content and put it into forums that can be used with someone who has disability needs in very controlled ways. And then the final challenge is library support. We think of the sciences, the labs, linguists. Those folks generally have quantitative data science skills or expertise in their labs or in their departments. The humanities, not so much. And so we see digital humanities centers as helping bridge the gap and helping the humanists sort of tap into these rich resources and make use of them in new and exciting ways. But that is a financial, that has a financial cost. Even, wait for it, at Yale, it has a cost. I mean, every position we hire for has to go through our executive council, and we have long debates. I mean, we've caught up to the rest of the world, and so we have to make these investments. We've received a grant, we've hired, we're hiring and building out a digital humanities lab, and again, a significant financial impact for us. It's not free. Even if we can make use of the content using TDM, we have to make an investment on our side. So thank you, and I would these are three of my colleagues who were instrumental in helping me with this presentation, but don't hold them responsible for what I said. Thank you.
Hey everybody. It's terrific to be here today, and I've really enjoyed already learning from my fellow panel members. We've had some lively discussions in preparation for this, which has got me thinking afresh, and I hope the discussion today will continue that. So let me offer a publishing perspective on the same space. TDM is interesting and it's challenging for all of us, and it's really important, I think, that libraries and publishers work together, because we're all supporting researchers, so that the more we're aligned, the easier it will be for them. We have a wide array of TDM programs. We're actually working in close partnership with specific universities. We have a policy But we also have service channels. So we're supporting TDM miners through a development portal, and we provide quite a lot of technical support and services beyond just access to the content. Some of our corporate customers, for example, work with us quite closely to develop TDM software and tools. That isn't a call that's been made on us for the academic community, or at least not yet, but it's perhaps something that will come in future. We have been engaged in text and data mining support for almost 10 years now, and it started off in a very small way with one group of researchers in California who wanted access to our publications for developing text and data mining tools back in 2006. And so that was interesting, those really early adopters. We stepped up, I think, and made a scale change in our support for TDM in about 2013 when we engaged in around 30 pilot projects to better understand the challenges of mining for researchers and libraries and publishers. And we kind of thought it would explode at that point. But interestingly, I think we, along with other publishers, are seeing a slow, steady growth in interest in text and data mining, but there hasn't been that explosion yet. It still feels that we're very much in the early phases. We're still actually engaging with early adopters, which is interesting. Okay, so some of the challenges from a researcher's perspective, they need access to computers and code and things that they may not easily have. A lot of the early adopters are actually writing their own code, and that's a barrier potentially to the wider use and uptake of mining. They have to deal with access to content in a variety of different formats across different platforms. And there's a lot of refinement and testing and learning and gurning through data and outputs to kind of get meaningful results. And I think gaining access to those different platforms and permissions to mine across all the different platforms is, of course, a challenge for them and something it would be helpful for us all to help resolve. I hesitate to say to librarians what some of your challenges may be. I'm sure you know that better than I do. But we do hear from our library partners that actually it's pretty demanding for you all because you are supporting a wide array of research projects on your campuses, and they may have really different mining requirements. So, developing the expertise, hiring people with the right expertise to be able to really provide tailored support is a new challenge. It's a hassle for you as well if there are different access requirements and permissions and things across different platforms. And something that Daniel and Darby really brought home to me, your user privacy is really important to you. So what your users are doing across different platforms and how that's being monitored or tracked is a concern. Any additional cost at all is going to be a challenge. And we're also hearing from librarians that they're sometimes concerned about how TDM figures are being factored into the counter usage statistics. So they want to see publishers reporting separately on machine users and human users. From a publisher's perspective, there are other publishers in the audience, for example, from Sage. So this is one perspective. But again, we're having to support TDM projects across a wide range of subject areas, hard sciences and humanities, and those have very different support requirements. We also are supporting users with a wide array of technical experience. So when they're mining, they're actually often writing programs that are then being run on our platforms. And many miners are very sophisticated, they have terrific software. That's not always the case, though. We do have examples where, somebody lets their software loose, they haven't really tested it well, and it kind of goes crazy. So this is one reason we do ask miners to tell us what their email address is, so that if their program kind of goes wild, unintentionally, we can get in quick contact with them and ask them to, please stop running that code. Legal challenges. We're a global publisher. Every law in every country, in every state is different. And yet we need to have a simple, easy-to-use service that's understandable, that works across all of these different boundaries, national boundaries and institutional boundaries. So in our case, we've come up with one clause that we insert into all of our site license agreements that covers text and data mining from an institution's perspective. We agree that separate agreements aren't necessary, but we do need some kind of license in place because not every country has the same approach. And privacy for users is also important to us. To maintain their respect and our credibility, we need to very much respect user privacy, and we do. Okay, and then finally, we have to find ways of supporting miners, the machine users, in a way that won't undermine the quality of service we're providing to human users. And this is actually the reason we use an API service and let the miners go to town on that. It's a completely different platform, actually, than our human users are experiencing and interacting with. So one doesn't affect the performance and speed of the other. We have a TDM policy. We don't make any additional charge for text and data mining. I know other publishers have other approaches, and I've got some sympathy for that. It is not inexpensive to develop the infrastructure and so forth for text and data mining. So if you have concerns about that from other publishers, engage in dialogue with them, but I would urge you to be open-minded and sympathetic about the fact that they may be incurring new costs as well. And we also have made a firm commitment that if any researchers in academic institutions want to mine content that their institution doesn't actually subscribe to or have access to, that we'll respond and be really flexible there. So we have a universal access at elsevier.com email address where you can make those sorts of queries if you need that support. There is a registration portal, and I've personally registered for an API key, and you guys are right, it's a pain in the ass. So we have some work to do, I think, to get this streamlined a little bit more. The idea is we do want that user's email address in case we need to get in contact with them about their code. We used to ask them questions about their subject area and their projects so that we could learn ourselves what they were requiring in different subject areas, but we want to step away from asking intrusive questions. They don't want to fill in forms for us, and we've now had pilots, so we've got that understanding. There's a simple click-through license for our TDM services, and I've shared it with Daniel so he can tell me afterwards if it's simple enough or if we need to continue refining it. But one of the things I've discovered in preparing for this session is that the way it's been installed, there's actually another click-through license before you get to the TDM license, which is not intended. That's just an error in how it's been implemented. So again, on behalf of Elsevier and other publishers, if you or your users are interacting with our TDM services and you find stupid, awkward things like that, let us know. It's probably a mistake rather than a conspiracy or deep evil, honestly. Okay, so we've rolled out the TDM access clauses into all of our site licenses, again, at no additional cost. If anybody's been missed and wants them, just get in touch with your account manager or contact that universal access email address. The big thing, though, is that we recognize that miners, that librarians don't only need access to Elsevier content. We honestly do get that. So we're partnering with other publishers through Crossref on an industry-wide text and data mining service. And this essentially gives researchers a way to get API keys and permissions and to go to town across our platforms so they can access a wide variety of content. So here are the publishers currently participating. We have about 13.5 million articles at this point in the service, and that can grow quite drastically. It's estimated that we're on course for about 36 million by the middle of next year. And that service from Crossref and the cross-platform mining is a completely free service as well. So there's more to be done. There's more refinement. We want to work closely with librarians. We want to work closely with other publishers. And I'm looking forward to learning more about how we can do that more effectively. Thanks, everybody.
well, my thanks to Daniel and Alicia for really spelling out in a really clear fashion the issues and the complexities of all this. I think what I'm going to do is simplify things. I'm a simple guy. I'm a get-it-done kind of guy. And my experience has been in the trenches of working with many, many vendors to try to cut to the heart and to make a deal, to make this happen. And I think I have some solutions to some of these, or at least one solution that we need to go ahead and move on with regard to this complex area. A few years ago, a couple of years ago actually, this really came to my attention when I attended a campus colloquium at NC State on mining. And this was sponsored by one of our social sciences units. And I was shocked to find hundreds, yes, hundreds of faculty and graduate students in attendance. And when one of the speakers asked, how many of you are engaged in this activity, almost every hand went up. I knew that there were a lot of folks working in these areas, but what I didn't know was just how many were already doing this and how many were not using necessarily library resources to do this. Now, certainly we have some library resources that particularly social scientists know they can get data sets from, and that's great. But I also found in the course of this session that a lot of these folks were using whatever data set they could find on the web, whatever was convenient, whatever seemed to be well-structured data, but not necessarily the best data to answer their particular research questions. And we in libraries particularly are worried about, well, if you're like me, you're worried about the role of the library in research heading into the future. Here we are providing these wonderful resources, and are our users actually taking advantage of them? We need to make it easier. We need to open up our collections for computer-assisted research. We need to open it up for these sorts of research informatics like mining. I also, as I looked around the library community at the time, I found a lot of folks who said, oh yeah, we've had that on our radar for a long time. Oh yeah, we have that as part of our license agreements, that we part of our checklist, we ask for, mining rights or access rights. And I had one colleague from another institution who said, oh yeah, we've negotiated those rights with a couple of dozen vendors. I said, send me a list. And they sent me a list, and probably the most interesting was, well, I'm making this up, but the Journal of Esoteric Studies and the 3 titles they published, they had mining rights to that. There were no major publishers on the list. None of the content that our users would really be wanting to do was opened up for this. And I think really, as I found, in rolling up my sleeves and working with vendors on this, I find a push-me-pull-me on both sides of this equation. On the vendor side, there's this fear of letting the data out. And I think that it is sometimes a very well-founded fear. There have been instances I've learned of in confidence of where content has gotten out there and been posted on the web. Usually it's in China, but hey. And so there's this fear of letting things out. And I think on the other hand, I think a lot of vendors have a real fear of being last to the gate. They recognize that this is an area that they really need to respond to, but they're really not sure how to do that. They're afraid that their content will become devalued if they don't offer it, but they're really not sure how to do that. On the other hand, I think we have a lot of this push-me-pull-me of librarian confusion. For one, I think that I find on the library side a lot of misunderstanding of vendor capacities. And that's a big problem. This is something, again, I learned from talking with vendors. One of these issues, for example, is the issue of siloed content. A lot of vendors are a little reticent to release their data because they're a little embarrassed. What on the front end looks like a seamless product or a seamless set of products is actually all kinds of mishmash of different data sets, because these have been things that have been developed over time. And they shouldn't feel embarrassed about that. Certainly we in libraries understand that issue. But I think that's one of the things that's going on, and there's this fear that maybe people won't know what to do with that. They won't know how to grapple with this data that's not in a single structured format. But that's okay. That's what researchers do. I think also that librarians oftentimes expect an awful lot, and Alicia alluded to this, expect an awful lot for no additional cost. And that's something that I have found, that's actually a confusion both on the librarian side and oftentimes on the vendor side. Librarians think, hey, you can create an API or you can customize a data set and that's no big deal. Well, sometimes it is. And I know also that in talking with the vendors, sometimes the vendors think that providing data is a very expensive proposition because their only experience with it has been with providing customized data sets that have required a lot of staff hours from very experienced expert programmers and such. I think also librarians grapple, and a colleague was mentioning this to me last night, between addressing the present needs and addressing the future. One of the things that we should be doing in libraries is thinking towards the future, thinking about what our users will need versus the sort of now it's just the early adopters, as Alicia said. And so I think that really thinking about what are we doing when we put together agreements for mining, we're not building a bridge to nowhere. We're building the bridge that is across that great chasm where all our researchers are headed towards, or a great many of them. And I think the biggest confusion all around on the part of both libraries and vendors is, what do we do now? Where do we go? How do we take all this morass of confusing things and turn it into meaningful action? And I appreciate that when we talk about these things, talking about mining, it implies new services. It implies new support. It implies new roles. This is for libraries and for vendors. And I can't answer all of that and what that'll look like, but I can tell you the first step. I've been advocating, and this is what has allowed me to ink so many of these first-of-kind deals with a great many vendors. So I've been advocating for a very basic access model. And I realized just this morning, I finally have my snappy name for it. The basic access model. BAM! Let's move towards BAM. Hey, in the real world, there's oftentimes a BAM that comes right before mining activities, right? Am I taking it too far? The basic access model. Well, our idea of basic access will change over time, but what does that mean right now? How do we get access to this for particularly, and at this point, it's our early adopters, it's our high-end researchers. First of all, we need to get all the data. We need to get all the files for those researchers. I've learned that speaking of raw data, that's not the terminology oftentimes to use in the vendor community. For some, actually creating raw data is an extra step for them. So I say, well, what format do you have the data in? Send me those files. I want to include not just the text files, but also the image files. And there are a couple of important reasons for that. One, depending on the researcher and what they want to do, those things can be extremely, extremely important. Secondly, as we look to the future, we talk now about text and data mining. I prefer to use the term content mining because there already are researchers who are thinking about mining images, mining video. Let's think about, let's have a generic term for talking about all of these formats that will become an important part of mining activities in the future. Next, we need to have clear and appropriate cost recovery agreements. It's not fair to ask the vendors to do all this for free, but at the same time, let's have a reasonable cost model for this. Now, when I worked out the agreement with Yale, the solution that we came to, a very inelegant one, but maybe the best one was that the content that we needed, they delivered all the files to us on physical hard drives. And they charged us the cost of those hard drives. That's fair. That was what we negotiated. Why? Because even with all the wonderful bandwidth that we have at NC State, it would take a long, long time to download all that data. And in fact, one of my colleagues from the library took the hard drives and walked them over to our laboratory for analytic sciences, where one of our faculty, Paul Fife, put together a team and has started to mine 19th century British newspapers. An inelegant solution. That's what is basic at this time. It will change. Bandwidth will increase. Hey, we can make changes. But if that's all, I mean, he is right now, he and a team of researchers are working on this data. If we waited, and again, people have asked me, why didn't Yale provide an API? Why didn't Yale do something better? Yale should instead be applauded for going ahead and taking this step and becoming the first major commercial vendor of historical archives to offer this type of blanket access to a campus. And they've now turned around and opened that up to any of their customers. If we waited for them to get it all together, it'll take some time. And again, that's not just Yale, that's any vendor right now. They're all working on these issues. But we need to make sure that we nail down that basic access for our researchers now. I mentioned blanket access. That's another important key. We want to mirror the access that we have for close reading of this content. So we don't want to have an additional login. We don't want to have, as has been a point of contention between me and one vendor, we came to agreement on everything except they want to know, they want every single person who's going to mine that content to register their name and their project with the vendor. Absolutely not. Would we sign a license for content, for a database that had those terms? Absolutely not. There are a lot of good reasons why our researchers would need to keep their research private, at least for a time. Had one researcher who was going up for an NSF grant, very competitive grant, and wasn't quite ready to reveal his great idea for what he was going to do. On the flip side, do probably 99% of our researchers want to report that to the vendor, want to be able to have these conversations about the data and what they're doing? Absolutely. But that needs to be their decision, not a requirement. Lastly, we really need to have in this basic access model, we need to make sure that there are no special restrictions on mining activities or the outputs. And Daniel alluded to this. These things are already covered by our terms. They're covered by copyright. They're covered by the provisions of fair use. The irony is, I've had a lot of vendors who say, oh, well, we want to limit the number of words that can be put out there. We want to limit the number of characters. No, I mean, we don't need to do that. We don't have to have a special agreement. And in fact, the irony is that our folks who are mining, and this is particularly in text mining environments, their outputs generally cite less of the text than those people who are doing close readings, because their outputs are quantitative. Not to mention that many of these researchers are doing close reading and computer-assisted distant reading and putting their interpretations together. Well, where do you draw the line? Do they have to follow these restrictions because they had a mining element to their research, or can they follow these because they were also doing regular, just using the database? Again, we don't need to complicate things. That's why I'm advocating for this, the basic access model. Bam! Thank you.
Now it's your turn. Whoa. And I'm hoping you'll have some questions or a comment. So anybody want to get us started off here? I was thinking when they were talking about Henry Small, I don't remember how many of you would remember him from ISI, but years ago when he used to provide services for people, he would give you the data, and he'd have to do it in a relational database because we didn't have all of the tools, all the software and stuff we had now, and it's just amazing to think of how things have changed. Are there people here who have been negotiating contracts themselves that might want to comment on their experience?
Don't be shy, folks. That's why we have this microphone here, just
well,
for
we
you.
have this one too.
So please just share, state your name and where you're from, and we'd love to hear from you. I'm sure the panel would as well.
Anthony Watkins, and I wasn't going to ask a question because I don't know much about this, as Alicia knows, but I will ask a question because nobody else is doing so. What I'm not clear about is, are researchers wanting exactly what they get as a reader, or are they demanding at no cost, extra cost, something which is very different and prepared for machine reading? I don't understand this because people made several statements which seem to contradictory.
I think of this in terms of, I think all of the above. And I think that we have some of these folks who are really prepared and really know their stuff with regard to mining, and they just need the data, and that's great. I think we also have then a sliding scale down for that to folks who just have a kind of an interest in getting started in this area. They really don't know much about mining. For those folks, they're going to need some more hand-holding. They're going to need something beyond like that basic access model that I'm talking about. The nice thing about that BAM model is then it puts it out there and it leaves open the question of how do we support that. Some libraries may see that as something that they need to go ahead and support right away. Some libraries may see that as something that they can't support, that they want to look for third-party solutions to that or vendor solutions to that. And I think that's the space. It's that neophyte or middle-level space where there is opportunity, I think, for vendors to monetize mining, but to do it by providing those services at scale that those types of users are going to need. But what I'm very concerned about is I don't want the needs of the high-end researchers, I don't want that basic access to the data to be held hostage to particular tools developed by a vendor for doing that. We don't want to have only, for example, we don't want to have only a dumbed down, if you will, model of a dumbed down system for mining, because that may be what most people need right now. We want to be able to support our users at all levels.
And I'll come back with the reverse roles here, and I'll come back with a very specific example. You can search for robots reading Vogue, and that's a great example to show you a project that we worked on with ProQuest, where they gave us the data or the content, and we're able to use the bookworm tool, it's an ngram tool, to look for word occurrences. And so you could actually look at Vogue and you can see how women are referred to over the past century. And you can map that to the editors of Vogue. And so you can see how editorial changes along with cultural changes are involved. And then you can look at, if you click on a specific point in any of these line charts, you actually link back to the ProQuest site to see the article from which that particular data point was pulled or set of data points was pulled from. Also mining images and how the cover images have changed by decade, and the way particularly women have been represented. And so it opens up interesting possibilities around cultural history and women and gender studies and things like that. So maybe it's a little more concrete example.
Yeah, and I agree. There are different needs and different formats. Most of the miners of our content like XML with tagging that's around the content rather than the physical presentation, the formatting sorts of tags that we would have to produce a print version, for example. But there are some researchers that like actually that added context, so it just depends.
Here, question?
Kyle Stewart from Yale. So I actually had the pleasure to meet Peter Leonard at a conference a couple years ago, and he demoed me the tools that he and the team had built for the Vogue project. Very cool. But he's clearly a power user where, as a vendor, you can just kind of give him the data and then walk away. On that other scale, you said you had way more people than you anticipated showing up to digital humanities events, for instance. As a vendor, what should our role, if any, be in providing the support and the tools behind that? Like, what do you envision that as? Because it's, data mining tools pretty wide and the support pretty wide.
Well, I don't envy your position figuring that out right now. And I think we have, in libraries, we have our own problems with figuring out how are we going to support these things? What are the services? What are the levels of services that we're going to be able to offer to support these things? And we're going to be thinking, all of us in libraries are going to be thinking about what are the ways where we can look to vended solutions that may be more cost-effective for us. And I think that's the space where we need to continue having, that's the next step. After basic access, that's the next step of the conversations that we need to be having. There is, for example, there's a social sciences product that Sage offers that is a great example of what the future could be for this. The content of it is all data sets that are open access, that are freely available to anyone who wants them already through the Odom Institute. But what Sage has done has been to take that content and then build on top of it a layer of tools for mining and working with those data sets that are very, very useful for research and for teaching. And so a lot of libraries are finding that a valuable asset to have, something very much worth paying the money for, even though the content itself is something that they could have for free. So I think if I were a vendor, I think I'd really be thinking about how I could add that type of level of value to my product, while at the same time providing that basic access model so that the high-end researchers can really be publishing and be putting out information about that data set that's going to contextualize your product, that's going to make it so much more attractive to folks, both for close reading and for further mining.
And if, totally up to you, but if Gail might consider the Crossref TDM service, that would be terrific. You'd be really welcome. We'll talk. Yeah.
I want to thank you. It looks like we're running out of time. One last question I'd like to ask. How many of the people in the room are liaisons or subject librarians or bibliographers or whatever we're being called now? Because that's one area that we don't talk about a lot, because normally we're kind of on the front line. You'll talk to those doctoral students or those faculty, and they'll tell you, I'd really like to study this or that. And trying to figure out, well, what database would it be or whatever. That's another area I think that we as a profession, at least from the library side of it, academic libraries, really need to address as well as far as what we're doing. And contracts are obviously important. Physical access is important. Who keeps the data and all that sort of stuff. But I guess I've been surprised. I went to another session too on this, but not to have heard that from people, because I find myself often having to really probe and then go back and do my own research and then probe a little bit more to try to figure out what direction am I supposed to give this person. It's not like we have a list of databases and some really nice configuration to help pick things. We're kind of stuck. But I hope this has been useful for you. I want to thank our speakers today, and I want to thank you for coming, and I hope you have a really great rest of the conference. So thank you very much.
Well done. I think this is a classic Charleston session. Very interesting food for thought. So have a great evening, everyone, and enjoy the poster sessions.